Praise the Lord, everyone. My phone over there was in rebellion. It wouldn't let me turn it off. You saw from the last video, there could be like comic effects, unintended comic effects when that phone starts ringing. But I think it's going to leave me alone for a while. Well, welcome back for part 7. And thank you for faithfully going through this series with me. I appreciate it. Special shout out to my good friend and brother, Mr. James Frazier, and to Kairos, and to some of you others who've been commenting your encouragement in the comment section. I really do appreciate that. And I must say, if you've been following this series to this point, if you've watched most of the videos, the first 6 or all of them, you are a serious student of the word. And I have good reason to believe that I'm going to be seeing you when the roll is called up yonder. So congratulations. Well, we finally made it to part 7. I don't know if this is going to be the final part or not. It better be, because I'm falling behind on my schoolwork here. Some of you know I'm in a THM program now, inspired by some of these discussions we've had in the last 2 years. I decided to go back to school and complete that postgraduate degree I never completed. And I've got a lot of reading and writing to do as we are in spring semester here. So I should try to complete this series on Hebrews chapter 11, which I thought was only going to be 2 parts. It turned into 7 now. And who knows, maybe it'll be 8 and 9. I don't know. I'm through predicting. But let's see how far I get with this. It's possible I could complete today. We'll see if I don't digress too often, as I have a tendency to do. But let me do a very quick reminder of what we've been talking about in the first 6 parts, no more than 5 minutes. I just want to show a couple of things that we've been talking about, and then I'm going to get into these last 11 verses in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 30 through 40. And then maybe I'll have some concluding thoughts about it. So stand by. So way back in part 2, I was talking about the etymology of this koine noun, pistis. This is the word, the koine noun that gets translated faith in Hebrews chapter 11. And the meaning of faith is what we are trying to get a handle on. What is it talking about? Is it talking about confidence, trust, or faithfulness? That is what the series has been trying to decide. And we've made a very good case, I believe, that faithfulness was the intended denotation of the author of the letter to the Hebrews. And back in part 2, we looked at the etymology of this word. Where does it come from? Well, turns out in Greek mythology, pistis was the personification of good faith, trust, and reliability. And when we say trust here, we're talking about someone you can trust. We're not talking about somebody who's gullible. We're talking about somebody who can be trusted. So pistis, this word, this Greek noun, it comes from the Greek god, the personification of good faith and reliability. Now, in Christianity, as in the New Testament, pistis is typically translated as faith. And that's the problem here, because we've all been trained to think that faith is talking about trust. Whenever you see faith in the New Testament, you're thinking, oh, yeah, trust. No. In English, the noun faith, also the primary meaning we talked about too, is fidelity, good faith, sincerity, loyalty, duty. These are the denotations of faith, which the author of the letter to the Hebrews is talking about and commending, because he's trying to encourage his own readers to stay faithful to King Jesus and not apostatize back to the old temple cult. So again, pistis is typically translated as faith, And we're trained to think it's talking about trust, confidence. No, it's talking about fidelity. Unless you see the content of the faith spelled out in the immediate context, it is talking about faithfulness. Okay, the Roman equivalent was fides, a personified concept significant in Roman culture. Again, it's the same thing. Fides, faithfulness. Just like the Marine Corps has its own motto. How does it go? Semper Fi, short for fidelis. Yes, loyalty, duty, honor. That's what this is about. It's not talking about trust and wishful thinking. Move on to this other reminder here. And once again, I'm not going to belabor this, but this is the definition of the Koine noun that gets translated faith, pistis. And I want you to focus on this right here. Two possible denotations: faith in the sense of confidence and faithfulness. Both are nouns, they're not action verbs. They are nouns. Even in the sense of confidence, we're not talking about mental activity. We're talking about a thing, an overall possession of confidence, or we're talking about faithfulness. And I believe this is what the author of the letter to the Hebrews is talking about, faithfulness. All right, moving it along here. I want to review what we've already talked about in the first 29 verses real quickly, because we have to choose here. Is the author talking about confidence, or is he talking about faithfulness? Well, if he's talking about confidence, why doesn't he spell out what they were confident about? Where is the content of the confidence? He's not talking about that. What he is talking about is what they do, what their actions were, what their faithful, obedient actions were. Look at verse 2. The ancients received approval. Okay, for what? For faithfulness? Well, yeah, that's what I said, because verse 2 ends one word short. For faithfulness is the very next word that starts verse 3, and it should have been attached to verse 2. Verse 4, Abel offered a more acceptable sacrifice. The author is talking about something Abel did. He's not talking about the content of what Abel was so confident about. Verse 5, Enoch pleased God. How? From thinking the right warm fuzzies about God? Doesn't say so. But we know from the ancient accounts, Enoch was faithful to God. Verse 7, Noah builds an ark and saves his household. Okay, why? Well, he was warned, right? He was told what he had to do, and he did it. Does the author talk about Noah's trust? No, he talks about his actions. 8 through 10, 17 through 19, Abraham obeys God and passed God's test. Remember, he was told to sacrifice his son Isaac on an altar, and he went ahead and was about to, and God stopped him. But he passed God's test of faithfulness. Abraham always obeyed. He didn't always believe, but he always obeyed. We read Romans chapter 4, and we think, wow, Abraham was so credible. Abraham believed God, and it was accredited to him as righteousness. No, he didn't believe God. He obeyed God. If he believed God, he wouldn't have tried to pass his wife off as his sister to Pharaoh in Genesis chapter 12. If he believed God that he was going to have so many children, he would not have had Ishmael by his wife's Egyptian slave, Hagar. Genesis chapter 16. Abraham doesn't always believe, but Abraham always obeys. And that's what this author is commending. verses 11 and 12. Sarah, who's very old, she's able to give birth to Isaac, and through Isaac, a multitude. Well, is Sarah being commended for her great trust, her great belief? No, because the Genesis 18 text says that when the angel of the Lord told her she would have a baby, a male child, by this time next year, she laughed. So she didn't believe him, but she was rewarded for her faithfulness to her husband and to her God, because she obeyed just like Abraham did. Verse 20, Isaac blessed his sons, Jacob and Esau. How does he bless them? By being faithful to God. That's how he blessed them. Verse 21, Jacob blessed the sons of Joseph, and in the same way that he had been blessed by his own father and grandfather, by being faithful to God, by obeying, doing what God said. Verse 22, Joseph predicted the future and gave instructions for it. Did he do this by confidence? No. How could he have? He didn't have any knowledge, direct knowledge of it. But he was faithful to give instructions that would protect. He acted as a prophet and protected his descendants by telling them what would happen in the Exodus. And he gave instructions for them to carry his own body back to the promised land. Verse 23, Moses is safely hidden by his parents. Now, again, is the author trying to commend the parents of Moses for their trust or for their obedience? Moses, in verses 24 and 26, he rejects the privileges of being Pharaoh's grandson, and he suffers with his own people. Again, is the author praising Moses for being so confident about things? Well, if he is, he doesn't spell out the confidence. What was Moses so confident about? Doesn't say. Clearly, he's talking about faithfulness. And the same thing in verses 27 and 28. He flees Egypt, keeps the Passover. And verse 29 talks about how they crossed the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army hot on their heels. And again, if you can imagine these Israelite families who've been slaves all their life, and now they're running for their lives from Pharaoh, are they really filled with confidence? Well, their actions in the desert will show that they weren't all that confident. In fact, a lot of them wanted to go back to Egypt, but they were obedient to Moses and survived. So I'll put this down for a moment here. So the author has taken us from the faithful deeds of Abel, of the first family, all the way to the time of Moses, when they're escaping from the Egyptians. And he's praised the selfless and the obedient action of these ancestors. So what do you think he's going to do now as he takes us from the time of Moses all the way to his own time, Judas Maccabeus, which is only 2 centuries before? What do you think he's going to? You think he's going to be commending the heroes of right think, or is he going to be commending the heroes of faithfulness in an attempt to encourage his own readers to stay faithful despite their own persecution? Well, what do you think? You think he's really going to be talking about they're brimming with confidence, and you people need to be confident too because they were so confident? As we go through these verses, see if you can find the content of the confidence, because I've tried and I can't find it. What I see are more deeds being spoken of, actions. Their actions speak about their hearts. So let's have a look. We'll get through the last 11 verses, and I think you'll see the case for faithfulness has been made. Stand by. So in the next 10 verses, he's going to bring his readers more or less up to the present. In fact, he concludes chapter 11 with a discussion about their own generation. But he continues in verse 30 here, talking about faithfulness. And this time it's about Joshua. Joshua, if you recall, succeeds Moses and will march his people into the promised land that Moses and the unfaithful couldn't cross because of their unbelief, actually their disobedience in the wilderness. All right, so he continues here in verse 30, by faith. And as I said in other parts, the case, because this word that gets translated by faith, I have it in green, piste, it's in the dative case, it demands a different preposition because piste here is the indirect object of the verb, means it's the recipient of an earlier action of the verb. So being the recipient, it's got to be with faith or with for faith. And of course, it's speaking about faithfulness. So I have in the blue here this additional bracketed information. This word, this noun, piste, and again, it's a noun, not an action verb. It's not talking about mental action. It's talking about a noun of some sort. It's either by confidence or it's for faithfulness. And I believe it's for faithfulness for all the reasons I've said in the earlier parts, which I won't repeat here. By faith, actually, no. For faithfulness, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. Remember that story from Joshua? The pagans are holed up inside of this pagan city, Jericho. They were demanded to surrender it. They wouldn't. The Israelites marched around for 7 days. The walls of Jericho come crashing down. And it wasn't from confidence. It was because they obeyed Joshua and marched around this city. And moving to verse 31, if it allows me here. Okay. Where are you? Verse 32. All right, I don't know what happened to verse 31. I'll get back to it. By faith, piste, for her faithfulness, the harlot Rahab perished, not with them that believe not. Again, this King James version, I have their spin translation and read, them that believe not. Actually, the verb means disobeyed. For faithfulness, the harlot Rahab perished not with them that disobeyed when she had received the spies with peace. I don't know if you remember this story in Joshua 2, where the spies of Joshua, they were told to go have a look at the city Jericho and see what the opposition might be like. And this woman, this harlot Rahab, finds the two spies and hides them. And in exchange for her helping out the spies of Israel, they promise that she will not be harmed, her and her family will not be harmed when the city falls, when they come in and take over. And she had heard what the Lord had done for them to free them from Egypt. So she agreed to help them. And she faithfully hid the spies, helped them escape, and returned to Joshua. In exchange, she was rewarded. Pause for a second here. I saw my little error that I made. I had the story of Rahab. The verse about Rahab is actually Hebrews 11:31. I had it marked as 32. Sorry for confusing you about that. It's actually 31. Now we're going to move on to Hebrews 11:32. Stand by. Now the author is going to be talking about the judges, the heroes of Israel, who were the judges of Israel before they had a king. There were hundreds of years when Israel was ruled by judges and prophets. They were pretty much, most of the judges were considered to be prophets of the Lord. So now the author is reminding his readers about them. And he says, what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel and of the prophets. So again, we're asking ourselves, is he talking about people who were filled with confidence, or is he talking about people who were faithful to the Lord, faithful to God? Well, if you look at Gideon, I don't know if you remember this story about the judge Gideon, who is going to help Israel recover from the oppression of the Midianites. Well, Gideon was not sure that he was dealing with an angel or a devil. And if you recall, he puts his fleece out and demands that a miracle be performed before he would actually lead the Israelites into battle against the Midianites. So he's not sure what's going on here, why he has been chosen to lead Israel against Midian. And so he puts out, he says, I'm going to put out this fleece from the sheep, I guess. And he says, I want all the ground around it to be wet, but the fleece dry. And another night he says, I want the fleece to be wet and all the ground around it dry. And so he demands proof that he is actually being called of God. And we in Christian circles to this day will say, don't be afraid to put out your fleece. Ask God to show you for sure this is what he has in mind for you. That's what we're saying. But if you're talking about people who are to be commended for their unflappable confidence, you certainly wouldn't bring up Gideon because, again, he demanded proof. He wasn't confident. Same thing here. Samuel and David, these people were not always believing, but they were obedient. So again, he's calling out people whose actions revealed their hearts, revealed their commitment. More of the judges and prophets who through faith to stay, again, with faithfulness, not with confidence, not by confidence, through faith. What through faith in what? If you're talking about mental action, trust, what were they trusting? Why aren't you telling us? You're not telling us what they're trusting. You're telling us what they did. And they subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, like Daniel did, quenched the violence of fire. Remember Meshach and Abednego? What's the third one? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Or as Dr. Falwell would, the late Dr. Falwell once said, yes, it was Shadrach, Meshach, and a bad Negro. He could get away with that. I probably can't. Anyway, they quenched the violence of fire and they escaped the edge of the sword. These are other prophets. You remember from the story of Elijah when Queen Jezebel was coming after the prophets of the Lord after Elijah had cut in half the prophets of Baal. They escaped the edge of the sword. Out of weakness, they were made strong. They waxed valiant and fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. So again, he's talking about what they did, not talking about what they thought. Women who served the prophets, Elijah and Elisha, they received their dead and raised to life again. And others were tortured, not accepting deliverance. There's a story in the apocryphal book, Second Maccabees, about an aged scribe, Eleazar. He preferred torture over living under the cruel dictator Antiochus IV, that they might obtain a better resurrection. This is, again, another story of 7 sons who would prefer to worship the Lord than the pagan king, the Seleucid king of Syria, Antiochus IV. Others had trial of cruel mockings and scourging, like Jeremiah. More of bonds and imprisonment. There's this pseudepigraphal book called Lives of the Prophets, discusses all the things that these prophets of the Lord suffered. It's not in our Bibles, but it was taken as credible by this author. And verse 37 says they were stoned, like Zechariah in Second Chronicles. They were sawn asunder. Again, this other pseudepigraphal book, The Ascension of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah is said to have been cut in half. They were tempted, they were tested. They were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. Again, he's not talking about people who are brimming with confidence. He's talking about people who are under severe persecution and yet stayed faithful, just like his readers. Heroes of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. If they're brimming with confidence, why would they be hiding? Why would they have to wander away? They did what they were told to do. All right, we're coming to the last 2 verses of Hebrews, chapter 11. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith. And again, this is more King James Version spin translation. That's why I have the having obtained a good report through faith in red, because the Greek verb there is where we get the English word martyr. But they received not the promises. The promises, of course, being of the new covenant. Jeremiah 31 to 34. The author of Hebrews discusses it further in chapter 9, verse 15, the new covenant. But this is the Charlie Michaels translation of 1139, for whatever it might be worth to you. And all these offered witness through faithfulness, but received not the promise of the new covenant. That's something this author's generation is going to receive, the new covenant. We're going to verse 40 here. Final verse. God, having provided some better thing for us, he's talking to his own readers, which is an opportunity to demonstrate our faithfulness, that they without us should not be made perfect or complete. Not be made perfect. Let's stop this for a moment here. I want to end this series where I started it, which was a discussion of the context. So I want to review the verse that came before Hebrews chapter 11 and the verse that came after it. And you tell me, after having seen 40 verses of Hebrews 11, you tell me whether the author is patting people on the back for thinking the right thoughts or trying to encourage them to stay true to Jesus despite the persecution. Stand by. We've seen enough of the King James Version and its spin translations. Hebrews 10:39 through the New Testament scholar William Mounce, who I don't always agree with, by the way, but I think he gets this verse correct here, and Hebrews 10:39, the verse before Hebrews 11 starts. But we are not of those who shrink back and are lost, but are of those who are faithful and so preserve their soul. Those who are faithful and so preserve their soul. And that's what is the verse that comes directly after Hebrews chapter 11? 12:1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, again, it's the same word there, martyro, cloud of witnesses. Actually, we are surrounded by a great cloud of martyrs, people who suffered, died, who went through all sorts of hardship. We're surrounded by a great cloud of these people. Let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. By sin, he's not talking about some drinking habit or some infidelity habit. He's talking about the possibility of going back to that temple cult, returning to temple Judaism. That's the sin that clings so closely because they're in Jerusalem. He's saying, let's not go back to that. Let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. We'll put this down for a moment. Once again, if you followed through the first 6 parts and got all the way to this point in part 7, well done. You're a serious student of the Word. And again, I have good reason to think that we're going to be seeing each other on the other side. So, congratulations. Just in closing here, this chapter, again, is all about faithfulness. The people he was writing to, the author of the unknown author of the letter to the Hebrews, was writing to Christians just before all-out war with Rome was about to break out. In the year 66 AD, a revolution occurs in Judea, Jerusalem, right where these recipients of this letter live. There's going to be all-out war with Rome. And this letter is written just a few years before that. That Jewish temple is going to be destroyed. In Rome itself, Christians are going to be lighting the night sky. They're going to be blamed for a fire that burns down Rome by the psychopath Nero, who was their emperor. It is a dangerous time to be a Christian when this letter is written. I'll say something else. As this series was being recorded, it's still a dangerous time to be a Christian in many parts of the world. In the Congo, I believe it was in early February, 70 Christians were beheaded rather than renounce Jesus. And just in recent weeks here, while I was doing this series, Christians in Syria have been slaughtered by Muslim fundamentalists. It's never been safe to be a committed Christian. Anyone who thinks they're going to heaven simply because they believe the old story and they're confident that it's true, sorry. As this author made very clear, we have to persevere. We have to follow that long and hard road that leads to life. You can be righteous now, and you can be facing judgment next week if you take the mark of the beast that's offered next week. Righteousness today does not guarantee your salvation. Eternal salvation is not something anyone alive already possesses. You can be righteous today, and I believe I am, and I'm hoping you are. If Jesus is your master, then you are. But current righteousness, just as the people he was speaking to, that author to the letter of the Hebrews, they were righteous. the recipients of that letter. But he did not know if they would stay that way. And the purpose of that letter was to encourage them to stay true, not to end up like so many who died in the wilderness when Moses was crossing. He wanted them to stay faithful, to receive the promise. If you want to receive the promise, you need to stay faithful too. I hope the series has blessed you. I hope you'll share it. And I hope you won't be spun by the easy Believists who think that this is a tribute to the heroes of right thing. No, it is, as I said, a tribute to the heroes of faithfulness. And I pray that you're going to be one of them. God bless.